Welcome to another episode of Ask the Expert. And I'm very excited about this topic because we've had a number of episodes on innovation and what's new in the industry and technology and the gig economy and that whole idea of always constantly wanting to innovate. Innovation only happens when change is enabled. So often there's a lot of talk of innovation, but the change component to make innovation happen often lags what we talk about in marketing, what we talk about at conferences and thought leadership. So I'm super excited to bring Colin McDonagh from Worksome into the conversation today. He has a huge amount of experience. He's been with staffing. He's worked at one of the largest MSPs in the world. He's worked on the client side at one of the largest technology programs in our industry. And so, Colin, thanks for joining me today. I can't wait to start on this topic with you.
Oh, delighted to be here. Looking forward to this one.
So, give me a quick background. I know you've got a varied experience, and I think that's why you're a perfect person to talk about this topic, because you see it for so many perspectives. So tell me a little bit about your background.
Yeah, so spent a number of years working in high volume recruitment. Cut my teeth there. Still to this day, I think it grounds me in one simple fact that at the end of the day, the most important thing is about the worker who's doing the work and getting paid. Getting those checks in on a Friday, we were in, high volume blue collar work, but it still resonates with me to this day that as, moved on, worked through Allegis, worked in large scale MSPs, predominantly in the tech space, building out programs, running programs, moved and spent time at Meta, then worked in the EOR space with Velocity Global, looking at global EOR, and now Worksome. But at the heart of it all is still the person who delivers the work. And that was driven into me from the very first day working in staffing.
No, and that is so important. Like that whole idea of not forgetting that, here's a job and a user and a hiring manager, and here's a worker, and connecting that and making that happen in an efficient way as possible is so important, right? And often we add more and more over time, thinking we're helping mature that, but often we're moving the job and the worker further apart, right? So no, it's such an important aspect when you take a look at things. So on the topic of change, why is change or enacting or enabling change so hard within our industry, right? Like I've been around the block a few times and been to many thought leadership conferences and sessions, and we talk about and market, and I find there's a lot of marketing on what's new and exciting, but it doesn't actually happen for 5, 10, even like sometimes 15 years, right? So there's a lot of new topics that we're talking about now that are actually starting to happen, but we've been talking them for a long time. So why is it so hard for change to happen in these programs?
I don't know if I had the silver bullet to all of this, I think we'd all be phenomenally wealthy, because I ask myself the same question all the time. When you see a ton of innovative products, ideas, especially just being coming back from CWS and hearing all of the amazing things that are out there, and still looking back and questioning as to why is it so slow sometimes? Why are we still having the same conversations maybe every 2, 3, 5 years? And I think there's a couple of things that resonate with me. I think there's fear of change, right? Like there's the fear of moving away from things are running well, they're doing fine. There's the fear of like risk, like taking a risk, both for myself, maybe personally in my career. Do I put my head above the parapet? But there's also, organizationally, we set up and we structure programs and we build things, and then everybody signs off and approves it. And then there's a fear of, if I do something new, is it not compliant, right? Like, is it, more companies are going down the route of direct sourcing, and it's like, oh, is having a branded website co-employment? Absolutely not. Like, but where did this fear even come from to make people think that, right? It's just, sometimes it's paralyzing. And I think, a combination of that and then being attached to the familiar and it's working fine and it's doing good and I'm busy, seem to be the kind of typical things that we see out there, right?
Oh yeah, no, I think you're nailing the why in that idea of fear. And if it ain't broke, why fix it mentality. I'm gonna put my efforts into other priorities, even though it's not optimized. You're wasting money, it's inefficient, you're potentially turning away top talent, all of those things that you know is so wacky when you start to break them down and you talk through them. And yeah, I often call those myths, right? So the co-employment gets thrown up all the time as a blocker, but if you really dig into it and talk to people in the know and real legal counsel, not just an internal counsel that has these myths in their head too, and just err on the side of caution, it helps take the steps forward, right?
100%. And the reality is there's a greater risk in most companies outside of contingent workforce programs than there is within them, because the parameters and the controls and the mechanisms they're putting in place are really good, but they also push people outside of it, and then the greater risk is exposed. But it's interesting to see how those habits over the years and that understanding of the familiar, and then I think the other element is how success is measured, or the goals and objectives, or the organizational group that owns the program, the team, the business, whatever it is. Where are they positioned and what are they motivated by, right?
Yeah.
Because in our space, very few people are actually motivated by or gold on getting work done. Like, speed to productivity is not out there yet, right? Nobody measures productivity. Nobody talks about productivity. We talk about time to hire, time to fill, all these other great metrics, but nobody actually talks about productivity. And I wonder if there's measurements around things like productivity and other areas, or if you were measured about the level of scope creep that you had rather than what's inside, right? Does it make you get driven by measurements, like the old saying, like, what gets measured gets done? Was it those things? So the familiar, the doing the right thing is the right thing, and does that make us impaired to looking at other opportunities? It's definitely a series of those events, I think.
Yeah, the other one that I think, is the feeling of being overwhelmed, and then you get into a analysis paralysis, because there's so many facets to a contingent workforce program. It's how do you try to simplify it? I'm not saying buy a silver bullet, because I've found that that's generally not the best way, but how do you prioritize how to start, right? And it's really important to not get too overwhelmed and worry about all the edge cases and then do nothing, right?
Absolutely. I think if you look outside of our industry and you look into, say, the technology space, or you look into other areas, but technology primarily, if you're building a product, right, what do you do first? You build an MVP.
Yeah.
You don't build the end product. You don't design the whole thing. You build an MVP, you test it, you break it, you try to break it. Like, you don't try to make it perfect from the beginning. And that's the opportunity. More pilots out there, try things, figure them out, all of those areas, and having that and learning from other teams. I think sometimes we get insular in our teams and our environments, and we kind of look to each other, maybe too much, actually, absolutely too much, right? And instead look to other divisions of the businesses that we either work within or other types of organizations. Say, like, how do they do things? How do they drive innovation? How do they drive change?
One thing you mentioned, and I want to highlight it, is the word pilot, right? Because that's a great way to watch change, enable change, and try to build it in a safe environment where you can test it. You can figure out some of the things that may break in a safe environment, fix those things so that they're ready for the products or whatever programs you're doing can be ready for like larger scale up once you've piloted it. And so that's, I think that is a great word. And I think you really hit it on it when you talked about technology and how they think about it. You got to build the MVP and using it in pilot situations where you test it and figure out how to fix things that may not be optimum, right? As opposed to a big bang approach, let's say, where then there's a lot more risk involved in a big bang approach.
Yep, 100%. Have to agree.
So, the why is often something that I'll throw out there, right? The why is change important. I think you hit on it earlier, that change is really important, especially in our industry, because talent is so critical to the businesses that we're servicing. But why always innovate and why always change? Is it a hassle, or is it something that you just got to build into the programs?
You absolutely have to build it in. A very wise person a long time ago told me that value has a half-life. And still to this day, absolutely believe in that, right? If we do this year what we do next year, and we don't change, we don't continuously improve in whatever industry, wherever you are, in your relationships, in any form of life, if you just keep turning up in your relationship and you do today what I did last year, you know what? That value is reduced by half. And then 2 years' time, it's down again, right? So in everything that we do, we need to continuously look to improve and deliver value and deliver that, because people just don't see it day over day, right? They just don't get it. And they start to avoid, if it's, running a contingent workforce program, if it's running a technology platform, whatever it is, unless people see something new and see it innovate, they don't want to use you anymore. And a lot of the times, again, and I think we'll use technology companies as references here a lot today, but you see how many times your apps get updated and improvements and widgets, and sometimes you like it and sometimes you hate it, but it's continuous because it's all around making sure there's engagement and that people are not avoiding you and are going elsewhere for whatever their need is.
Well, and I think the workforce is changing, the way work gets done is changing, people are changing, right? The pandemic has really driven just a earth-shattering change in the way people work, and the generational differences are coming in as well. So what the traditionalists, let's say, from when we look at demographics, to what the millennials and the next generations and even in between are happening, or change very different. And so what used to work is very different. Like I'm going to date myself, but I applied to a newspaper ad for my first job. I'm not sure that anybody applies to newspaper ads anymore, right? So there's this constant change in the way you hire and find people and how they look for jobs. And so it is so important to constantly be monitoring and evolving with as the things change, and ideally be ahead of the curve, right? That's the most important thing to get the best talent.
It's incredibly important. I think how information is consumed and how talent buys jobs is phenomenally different right now. And I don't necessarily think people comprehend it to the level of where it's at, especially when we think of extended workforces, especially when we think of non-permanent engagement. The reality is that the brand of the organization is being scrutinized by the candidates. I remember not fighting, but having a heated discussion with a HR director a number of years ago when I was on the MSP side and they were on the client side, and I was struggling because managers weren't turning up for interviews. They weren't treating candidates in the process as well as they could have. And eventually it was coming towards Christmas time, and I said to her, I was like, I had 10,000 candidates this year across Europe. That's 10,000 customers of yours. They are going out this Christmas to buy either your product or somebody else's product in the consumer side of things. If they don't get a good experience with your hiring community, all those, temporary workers, contractors, whatever you want to call them, they are not going to buy your product this Christmas. So help me make a decision here right now and help me work with the business on this, because every company is a sales-based organization, but you are definitely a sales-based organization. And she had the light bulb moment, and it happened. But it happened until that moment of that conversation. It was like, oh wow. And that was just around a very simple process of getting people to turn up for interviews, not cancel them, like the basics, right?
Yeah.
That conversation was probably 10 years ago. That conversation has evolved now to like how you control the messaging of your brand through whatever methods you're using to engage with talent is vital. That's how they're consuming your brand. And don't think that just because I was at Meta meant that we could get all the talent in the world, because we couldn't. A local company in Austin or in Dublin or in Singapore, if they communicated better to that talent, would get that talent, because that's how they're consuming it right now. Your competitors are everywhere. And it's how we ensure that we're really appreciating and understanding how talent is engaging with us, from permanent workers, temporary workers, gig workers. It doesn't make a difference. They're all looking at us and scrutinizing us in an incredibly different way than they were 5, 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah. If you're only using a newspaper to try to find talent these days, you're a dinosaur, right? And you're not finding the talent. So it is amazing how things evolve and continue to evolve, and you got to evolve with it, right? Or you'll lose that. It's an overused term, and it's an older overused term, but that war for talent, and it's only getting worse and worse and worse demographically, where we're going to be in chronic talent shortages. So it's so important to evolve and make sure that connection between, one, your brand is out there, so at least you can attract them into your funnel, and then once they're in your funnel, make it easy, wonderful, delightful experience to get to that job, right? And you'll attract better talent, and you'll engage them faster and better.
You will. I think the interesting one is I fundamentally disagree on that there's a shortage of talent. I actually think that the whole shortage of talent, the whole dynamics of talent is changing, because the industry has gone global and jobs have gone global. They've gone away from being a, Bay Area, New York, Dublin, wherever. Now you have low unemployment in Ireland, low unemployment in the US, but yet there's a question mark over like, how is there low unemployment? Because the economy is still a bit shaky and a bit rocky, and it doesn't connect with what was there in the past. The reality is there's so much more remote opportunities. There's so many more gigs out there. There's so many more ways to be creative and innovative with engaging talent. The explosion of EORs right around the world. This ability to access talent has never been easier if, and this is back to the root cause, if you're willing to change.
100%. So, let's talk a little bit about reasons why people should not change. And I know this is about enabling change, but in some cases they shouldn't, or shouldn't at the time often, right? And the more and more I look at it, timing is everything in a lot of cases, in a lot of situations. But why wouldn't, and why would you recommend to some clients not to change, right?
Yeah, look, I think the way we think about change and the way we think about evolution has to first of all be focused on the foundations of things like stability, right? If you are if you're brand new into a role and you're looking to come in, you got to really make sure that you assess everything right. You hear people doing like their 30, 60, 90-day plans and things like that. It's similar with any form of change. It's around looking at the risk of change versus the risk of stability. And back to the point earlier, that's why the pilot comes in, right? It's a lot easier to be able to pilot something before, really truly bringing in change. And then also reflecting on yourself and your program, or be it if you're if you're a client and you're running a program, reflecting on yourselves, or if you're, a business running a program for somebody else, rather than driving change because you're looking externally and saying there is an external demand for change, our hiring managers are telling us something, or my client is telling me something, or my MSP is telling me something, but actually reflecting internally on that and looking for the evidence, and not maybe kind of playing the blame game of we have to change because of that, rather than looking at it internal, because we can always construe data or evidence to meet our argument. We can always look at the information we have and put our biases on it, whether we like it or not. But instead, spend a little bit of time before impacting change to make sure you're reflecting on it yourself internally before really pushing forward with it. I think, a lesson I learned at Meta was very simple, where we looked at, were people direct sourcing or were they payrolling, right? And we had a significant volume of payroll in your program, and I would say if people are thinking about how they look at programs as a whole, and you look at the number of people who are being just pushed by the business through the payroll, pay this work, and I know them, whichever way it is, this is my friend, or I found, whatever way. I would say there's a statistically high chance that if you delve into that data, the business is sourcing that person themselves directly. They're probably on LinkedIn, they're searching, they're messaging, they're utilizing maybe another agency and paying them by credit card. They're doing something. Very few times or very few occasions are they actually really true known talent and pre-identified. A lot of the times it's not. And I think we sometimes look at the branding of a program and we think, oh, look, I'm doing really good. I'm not going to do something here. I'll focus on another initiative, rather than really delving into ourselves and looking at, why should I change? And am I looking at the right information? And am I spending that time to look at what needs real improvement versus what doesn't? And I think that level of reflection before you make the change, and make the change for the right reasons, is ultimately what can drive you not to make change in certain occasions.
No, it's brilliant, and it's so important, because just driving change to change, or knee-jerk reactions to situations on the short term, may have unintended consequences down the road if you do not take the time to think of the bigger picture, right?
So, biggest lesson I learned working at Meta was, what's the unintended consequence? And it was driven into me from so many different sources within the organization. But as a company, every decision was always asked with, what is the unintended consequence? And so few times do we ever look at the unintended consequence, even of a positive action. Like, even of the nicest thing you could do in the world, you may be looking at it for a particular group of people and forget someone else. And that point is, you cannot stress it enough. The unintended consequence needs to be understood.
So, this has been a phenomenal conversation, and I always like to get to the meat, the how, right? So, thinking about strategies, we've talked about a few, right? But, if I'm a program manager and I have just been to a conference, or I've heard of something innovative and interesting to me, what are some of the things I should be thinking about or doing in order to get ready for change, to actually sell change to the organization? Because a lot of that is part of it as well. And then there's a second part, and I'll keep reminding you of that, is how can some of the vendor community help enable change too? Because I think sometimes, that cooperation between the two parties, especially if it's honest, don't want to talk about collusion or anything not honest, but how can vendors help organizations in that change process as well? So that's kind of part two of the question.
Yeah, I think, look, let's start with the basics on part one, like database decision making, right? We want to ensure that whatever you're thinking about, whatever you're looking at, new or innovative, start looking at the data behind it, start building the evidence for that change, right? And really assessing and delving into it. I think that's critical, right? Like, scrutinizing your own data. If you have a very good customer satisfaction score, looking into it and going, okay, is it just one particular business unit? Is it what part of the business is not using me, right? Like who's not giving me feedback, and try and go and find feedback. Or, you know, as I said earlier on the payrolling, right? If I have a huge side of payrolling, like what's really happening in there, like questioning it, scrutinizing it, and really honing in on where is the opportunity for me. Listening, right? Like getting out there, listening to your customers. Having a conversation with someone else a while back, but I was talking like one of the biggest learnings I made was, you know, thinking that my customers weren't smart enough. And you know, we all know, right? We all have hiring managers. We've all had hiring managers who make dumb mistakes and things like that over the years. But really, like going and being empathetic and listening to them and understanding their problems and doing that level of discovery. And then, you know, to a certain degree, a little bit of humility, right? Acknowledging that the program you've built, it may be awesome, but looking for that 1%, like looking for those opportunities to improve continuously, right? And really pushing yourself, and not just focusing on, you know, here are all the good things we do. That's brilliant. Put them away and be happy and proud of them, but really start to focus on that continuous improvement and that drive for, like, you know, nothing's 100% perfect. So how do we get there? I think, yeah, like those are the key things. I think on the vendor side, we've all had the conversation. I've been the client, I've been the vendor. I need you to do innovation for me. I need you to come with some innovation next year for me. And I turn up as a vendor. I'm like, here's all my ideas. And they're like, whoa, this is crazy, right? Or, oh, I don't know how we feel about this. I don't understand it. It doesn't maybe land or resonate with me properly. And then I say, well, look, I'll tell you what, let's do this. And then eventually as a vendor, you get to the end of a year or another QBR, and it's like, oh yeah, we told you everything you needed to do this year. And as a vendor, you're frustrated. There's a theory of innovation, and there's a bell curve that goes with it. It starts at innovator, finishes at laggard. Bring it to your client and ask them, where are they on that bell curve? Get a good sense and feeling of like, hey, you talk to me about innovation, but explain to me how comfortable you are with the type of innovation that you ask about, right? Because you might be saying, I want innovation, but actually when they look at the chart and they look at the bell curve, they may be like, but I'm a laggard. It's like, okay, those two things don't necessarily connect, but
being a laggard isn't wrong. It's just they are, right? And maybe it's risk averse or etc. that they have to, you know, it takes longer from that standpoint. But yeah, the conversations, having a alignment in the understanding of that is important, so that, okay, then you as the vendor are bringing more risk adverse innovation ideas to it. So it's baby steps versus big bang approach, right? Yeah.
You're not writing the proof point with this client. You're bringing them the proof points afterwards. You're bringing them the case studies. You've got, you know, and you can qualify that. So, okay, as a laggard, are you thinking I should have 5-10 customers who've done something before you? You can measure that out with them, but get a good sense for where they're at, and then present them with anything that fits in that bucket, or say to them, look, hey, you're going to have to wait because you've said you're here, and we have 20 other things that are really great, but they're all on this list, and you're probably 6 months to 12 months away from being ready as per your discussion. Now, if you want to move yourself up the innovation chain, then let's talk about that. But I think having those honest discussions and really understanding where your customer is at is incredibly important to being able to present them with the right opportunities, because there's no point in, as you said, bringing them something fresh and new if they're never going to go near it.
For sure. Well, Colin, I can't say enough how much I've enjoyed this conversation. It's been fascinating, and it's such an important topic. You know, like we've said, everybody talks about innovation, and then when the rubber hits the road, sometimes the ability to change or the ways and strategies to change is difficult, and so change doesn't happen. And a year goes by and they don't feel like they've achieved anything. So, you know, thank you for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure. And this is such a great topic.
Absolutely. No, thanks a million for having me on, and hopefully we get to do it again sometime.
Talk soon. Cheers.